Okay, so I am here with Tyler Brockbank. He is the founder of Greencrest Club. Greencrest Club.
That's it.
It is therapy in a golf simulator. So thank you so much, Tyler, for being here.
No, I'm happy to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Of course. So you started your career obviously as a therapist, and then you did something that I have never seen. I don't know if other therapists are doing this, but you started implementing therapy in a golf simulator.
Yes. Yeah. So fun story. You're exactly right. So I've been a therapist for about 2.5 years. Um, got my master's degree in marriage and family therapy with an emphasis in professional clinical counseling. So all that is to say I technically do both or two sides of what we think of as therapy, right? I meet with couples. I've met with
Hmm.
families, parents, kids, everything like that. And then I also work with individuals on just the individual mental health side, depression, anxiety, OCD, whatever
Yeah.
it is. Um, and then the golf therapy, that came about, mm, that was about 6 months ago in September 2025. Um, I had this idea in the back of my mind for a while, and really it came out of a couple reasons, really. I was trying to fill my schedule some more. That was the
Hmm.
biggest one. And then I had realized that I really work, I have just this, the way who I am is positioned to work with men. I work a
Hmm.
lot with women and I love that. I really enjoy doing that. And I feel like we have good results there. But I know there are other people who are well suited to do therapy for women. Um, and I think just in my position, I wanted to help a certain environment or I mean population that could really need or could really use some therapy support who
Yeah.
wouldn't really go out and seek it. Um, so really that's where Greencrest was born. It was an idea of opening the door to therapy to people who otherwise would never consider going in and talking with somebody.
Yeah. Incredible. And when you started Greencrest, let's just kind of walk through your mindset. I'm quite sure people were probably like, "You're crazy. What are you doing? Is this going to work?" Um, how did you get past the fear of, are people actually going to come do therapy in a golf simulator, and just do it? Because obviously a simulator is a big investment. Like, if you've ever purchased a simulator, you know how expensive those can be. But
Mhm.
how did you move past that fear to be like, you know what, this is what I'm going to do, and it's going to be just fine?
Yeah. Yeah, there were a number of fears and you hit those spot on. What would people think of this idea? Because I didn't want it
Mhm.
to come across as, we're just catering or almost babying men, tricking them maybe into going to therapy. And
Right.
to some people, it does come across that way. And that's, of course, not my intention. I have much purer intentions with this. I want to provide support for people who need it, who wouldn't
Mhm.
who wouldn't receive it otherwise. Um, and really, what was incredible from the beginning was a lot of these fears kind of just got resolved immediately. I posted my first TikTok, and it wasn't anything special. It was just a couple pictures of introducing me, introducing this idea of some people aren't always comfortable in a therapy office. I'm a therapist that's now starting to see clients in a golf simulator as just a more comfortable environment to talk and still do the work of therapy. And I had
Yeah.
no idea how that would be received. I had no idea if it would even get in front of people. And that first one I had, this first TikTok, I had over 100,000 views just over the weekend and
Yeah.
hundreds of comments, people saying, "This is genius. I wish my dad would have had something like this when he was alive. I want my partner to come see you so badly." Noah Khan commented. He's the singer. I don't know
Wow.
if you knew that, but he just
Yeah.
said, "Great idea. This is awesome." So it got a lot of attention, and really, truthfully, there was not a single negative comment of
Yeah.
this silly, this is ridiculous. It was all so positive. People just embraced the idea so fully.
I think okay, I have been having I am very much obviously, the podcast, it's all about mindset, and I am the biggest proponent on reminding people that fear is such a liar. And
Mm,
like you just said, as soon as you actually take action, fear dissipates
yeah,
because it doesn't have anything to compete with anymore. You took a step towards where you want to go, and you don't know how it will work out. All you know is like, this is what I'm doing. It's going to work out, like, period. And look at what it did for you. And I know when we were scheduling this interview, the person that sent me your profile was Dr. Jenkins. And he was like, hey, I saw this reel on your Instagram. Reach out to him. It might be a really great person to connect with. And I was like, okay. And you're like, wait, which Dr. Jenkins? You're like, oh, he knew about me too. So I mean, it's just you don't know where things can go until you actually take the step, right?
yeah,
And it just works out so much better than you think as long as you actually take action.
right. I That's perfect. Yeah. I work with This is something I tell almost everyone, especially when anxiety is a topic we're discussing.
Mhm.
There's a lot of research out there that backs this up, but the way I can put it most simply is anxiety can only be experienced when we're focused on something in the past or the future. If we're fully
Yeah.
focused and engaged with something in the present, we cannot experience anxiety. It could be stress, it could be fear, but a healthy version of that. Does that make sense? It's
Yeah.
always beforehand of, "Oh, what if I just fumble my way through this podcast and it's so embarrassing?" Or afterward, I think about all the miss speaking that I did in this. But right
Yeah.
now, it's not anxiety. I'm fully engaged and I'm here talking with you. The anxiety just doesn't have room to show up right now.
Yeah, 1000%. And I know, do you think men and women experience I know, like, we're very different in terms of even our physiological responses sometimes, but do you think men and women experience anxiety differently? Or who tends to be more anxious? Is it men or women, or is it kind of both?
That's a good question. It's hard to really nail down an answer to that. Um,
That's fair.
because I think in my work especially, there's a lot of value in working with just the individual. And I
Mhm.
think there are certain, statements that can be made on men versus women or,
Yeah.
at certain populations and things like that. Um, I just don't consider that my role. I think my role is to
Mhm.
get in and work with the individual and see them for their experience and their personality and characteristics and
Yeah.
see what we can do to just help them. So I think it's a great question and one that should be studied if it's not already. I'm sure it is. But I don't yeah, I don't think I would have a good answer to that.
Yeah, that's fair. I just know, like, I have my own theories, and I haven't,
Mhm.
again, I'm going to put a disclaimer, these are theories, but I think just from societal conditioning, right, between men and women, where men are very much taught, like, be a man, don't feel your emotions, like, suppress it all. And
Mm,
now science is proving more and more every day, like, when you suppress your emotions, guess what? It's going to come up and it's not going to come up healthily.
right.
And so, and I think too, I'm not going to categorize all men, but I do think from the men that I know in my life, it's harder for men to express their feelings
Hmm.
and talk about these things, even in a therapeutical setting. And
Right.
so, what have you seen by getting out of that therapy chair and into, and obviously, like they're moving when you're in that simulator. They're maybe more open to talking because it's not that I'm not going to call it a sterile environment, but a therapy environment.
Yeah.
What have you seen in terms of just receptivity and openness and willing to talk when by taking it out of the stereotypical environment and putting people in an environment that maybe is less intimidating is what I'm going to use.
Definitely. No, that's a great way to put it. And like you said, it goes back to that environment that just
Hmm.
allows for open, vulnerable conversations. There's a lot of research out there that suggests women tend to connect socially with other people face to face, and men
Yeah.
connect better socially shoulder to shoulder, is what people call it.
Hmm.
So, it doesn't take a psychologist really to know this either. And I've pointed this out, and since, this has kind of been on my mind, even in social settings, at parties or just where we're with people, you can even look, and women tend to stand and look directly at each other in conversations. Men typically stand next to each other, looking out, at everyone
Yeah.
else, the room or whatever it might be. Um, Parents have commented that really the only time they can have conversations with their son is when they're driving in the car. They're both, in the front seat, but they're not looking at
Yeah.
each other, they're just driving. There's tends to be that side by side, shoulder to shoulder, just positioning, as well as that shared activity. The golf fits in here perfectly.
Yeah.
The If you want to be stereotypical, the grilling, right? Like at a barbecue, the men are standing there grilling
Yeah.
and they're talking, but they're engaging together. But it's much different than how it typically looks for women to, sit in chairs across from each other or just stand looking at each other. So I think that positioning, first of all, and the shared activity of the golf
Hmm.
really just lets the guard come down.
Yeah.
People comment like, "I have never talked this much in my life," after a session with me in the simulator. And
Wow.
I didn't think I would be sharing the things that I did, but it just seemed to come out. So I think that's
Yeah.
really the magic of it, and it's been amazing to see those little comments of men recognizing, "Okay, this was different, and it really worked."
Right. Well, and I know so I spoke with both Dr. Jenkins and Olivia Papakairos. They're both they work in the sports industry,
Mhm.
but there's something to be said about being able to say things that you have kept inside for years or decades or your entire life and having that weight lift off. So what a blessing to be able to have done something different that allows people to be able to do that. Like, kudos to you for that. And I can only imagine like how fulfilling that must feel, especially when you started this and you're like, I don't know if this is, don't know what's going to happen, but we're just going to do it anyway. Like,
Yeah.
like what a blessing. And it's just such an incredible feeling.
Yeah. It's been amazing because it is making a difference in people's lives, and
Right.
that's really what it's about.
Right. And so let's kind of pivot just a little bit to men's mental health. Um, I mean, I guess we can clarify for a second. Like if women wanted to go do golf in a simulator, like you're more than willing to
Of
do
course.
that.
Mhm.
Um, but the like you just said, the shoulder to shoulder, the beneficial part is probably going to be a little bit more for men just from a psychology standpoint. But
Yeah.
with men's mental health, like what do you see? Um, I feel like there's not enough of an emphasis on it. And I know that, now society is more receptive to mental health and recognizing like, hey, like people probably could benefit from therapy, whereas, maybe like a decade or so ago, there wasn't that much of a emphasis on it. What do you see in terms of just like men's mental health in general? Because I also feel like men, again, from that society standpoint where it's like, don't feel anything, like, what are the
Mhm.
dangers of not emphasizing the importance of being able to express your emotions and find a safe place, etc.? Like, what do you see as a therapist?
Right. I think there's a lot of value that can come through therapy specifically,
Mhm.
or just work around understanding emotions, emotional responses. We see a lot. Um, this is one, I guess. But oftentimes, there's a lot of men out there that are described as or feel themselves that they are just angry. That, they have a short fuse, or there's a lot of different ways that we can describe this, right? That
Yeah.
um, people bring up, and every time there's a case of anger, that's like the tip of the iceberg, right? That's what we see, but there's 70-80% of stuff underneath the surface that we don't see. And
Right.
every time with anger, that's a tip of the iceberg emotion. There's always something going on underneath that is oftentimes expressed as emotion. We see the emotion as anger, but there's a deeper emotional need that if we can tap into, get in touch with, I think we can live much more balanced and healthy and just, yeah, balanced and
Yeah.
healthy lives.
So so how does one get like in touch with what's actually going on underneath that anger emotion?
Yeah, there's a lot of it's a lot of learning, it's a lot of practice.
Mhm.
'Cause like you have touched on already, there has been, historically a tendency for men to be taught to just not feel emotion, not express emotion, not talk about emotion, and just handle
Yeah.
it, you know? Um, so we tend to go back a little bit, and a lot of times we know the happy, sad, scared, angry emotions,
Yeah.
but there's a lot more nuance there. There's a vocabulary there that really sets you free in a way, um, to live a much more balanced life and a much more in tune and connected life with yourself and emotions and with others. Um, we dig into, um, are you feeling betrayed or hurt? Are you feeling resentment, annoyance, frustration? Are you feeling tired, exhausted, left out,
Mhm.
vulnerable? There's so many of these really beautiful words to describe your current experience that one helps us understand it, and two helps us recognize that these are normal and common emotions to feel. There's a word for disrespected. There's a word for uninterested because you're not
Yeah.
the only one to ever experience that. That's a universal feeling.
Right.
So we can normalize it and make sure that you understand, hey, there's nothing to be ashamed of here. Ashamed, another great word. There's nothing to be
Right.
ashamed here if we can understand what it is you're experiencing, give a little bit of context to what, emotional response you're experiencing now. We can then have a greater understanding of where we are so that we can then move forward appropriately.
Yeah. Well, and what is like when someone can actually put words to what they're feeling, what is the significance of that? Just for future, right? Like why is it significant to be able to put words to what they may be feeling in terms of like their own healing journey, etc.
Yeah. I think when we can have a certain level of understanding and clarity about our internal experience, it frees us up in a way. If we can, I'll give this in kind of an analogy here. There's guys out there that have the knowledge and the technology and the capabilities to be put down in anywhere in the world, in the wilderness. And they'll know
Mhm.
exactly their GPS coordinates, right? They'll know their
Yeah.
elevation or the angle of the slope that they're standing on, right? Um, but I think in terms of an emotional world, we're put in different spaces, different environments every day, right? We feel ashamed, we feel ignored, we feel isolated. And it takes a certain vocabulary and knowledge and capacity to really pinpoint that location so that then we can pick the appropriate path to get where we want to be. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I think you just said a really important term right now, and I don't think you recognized it, but capacity. Because so many people don't have the capacity to feel those emotions or act on them or do whatever they need to do. And so, how does one build capacity? Is it through acknowledging what you're feeling, or like, how would one build capacity to be able to sit with their emotions and feel them? Because I know being able to feel and name your emotions is so important in terms of just like your mental health, being like,
Mhm.
okay, I'm feeling like scared right now, or I'm feeling overwhelmed, or whatever. But
Mhm.
how does one build capacity to be able to name those and sit with them and feel them and not suppress?
Right. I think a lot of it goes back to that understanding and clarity. I mean, I do some work with just the good old fashioned traditional feelings wheel. Are you familiar with that? That just
Hmm.
has
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
vocal and all of the different emotions. Well, not all of them, but you know, probably close to 100 different emotional words.
Yeah.
Um, and it's an exercise I do with some people that just sit down and say, "Okay, look at this and tell me 5 of them that stand out to you that you've experienced this past week or this past day."
Right.
Um, and that is so simple, but it's so powerful and eye-opening to people. I think that's like the one of the first steps we can take to, like you said, this capacity to um, be able to just operate in an emotional world, in an emotional internal world, right?
Hmm.
Um, so that's one that I go to quite often with people. I love the simplicity, but I love like the impact it can have.
Yeah. Well, and I think the hardest thing for most people is a lot of us, like, again, kind of going back to just even a decade ago, where I know for my parents, they were like, "Oh, you don't need therapy." Like, meh. That was their generation, right? Where they're
Yeah.
like, "You don't need therapy." Like, they're just gonna tell you that you're crazy. And I'm like, "Well, that's very, very common misconception." But there
Yeah.
are so many misconceptions around therapy and even like trauma and all of that, and trauma being stored in the body, and if you don't let that out, your body keeps score and it can cause major physiological issues for you.
Mhm.
But I think there's so much beauty in being able to name what you're feeling and sit with it and be like, "Oh, okay, I have words to what these are." And it doesn't mean feeling an emotion is bad, because we should all feel them, and it doesn't mean that what I'm feeling is wrong either.
Mhm.
I think a lot of people when we have reactions, whether that be anger or resentment or any of these things, we're like, "Oh, it's because I myself there's something wrong with me." And I
Mhm.
think that that is such a big, misconception because I
Right.
know for at least myself in my own, like, therapy healing journey, I internalized everything as because of who I am as a person, and then obviously as therapy progressed, it was like, no, like, it was never me. It
Yeah.
was, what things that I couldn't name.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. That's really good. And I think right. It's just that being in touch, I talk about being connected with yourself, um, and understanding, having that self-awareness of what's going on and then being
Mhm,
able to communicate it to someone else. That's a huge step. And I think a lot of times, going back to this anger conversation, there is some fear, maybe, subconsciously, that I don't know how to deal with feeling betrayed. That's a
mhm.
scary emotion. I'm not familiar with that one. Well, I'm familiar with it, but it's just there's some unknown things about what that is or how to deal with it. But I'm familiar with anger. That's an easy one,
Yeah,
right? We're all familiar with it. And so that can tend to become almost the default if
yeah,
not universally and not for every emotion, obviously, but some challenging ones that are just a little bit mysterious almost to us, we can default into a more familiar emotion. We can shut down, become sad. We know that one. We can, act out. We can become angry. That's a familiar one. We all know it. Um, so I think, going along the lines of that conversation we're having, that can be a big turning point for someone
yeah.
to build familiarity and build trust in themselves that they can effectively cope with these challenging or difficult feelings.
Yeah. How do you recommend someone start to build trust within themselves just in general? Because I think that that's a big thing too, is so many of us lack self-trust.
Mhm.
And when you can't trust yourself, it's very hard to make a decision. And it's very hard to move in the direction that you need to move in because you don't trust yourself, right? And you start doubting, and that's kind of where the doubt creeps in. So how do you recommend people build that self-trust or better resiliency?
Yeah. This is a great topic, one that comes up a lot. Um,
Let's go.
there's and I there are certain trends that just come up in being a therapist. It seems like there's
Yeah.
certain weeks where there's half a dozen cases from clients that come up that are very similar, right? There's just some trends that
Mhm.
pick out. One of which recently for me has been working with young men, maybe let's say 17, 18 to 23, 25,
Yeah.
where this issue is at the core right now. It's what am I doing? What am I going to do with my life? And who am I? What do I want to
Mhm.
be? And I don't have the trust or the confidence or the self-efficacy or the ego strength to know who I am and what I want and how to get there. Um, and then really it's when we talk about confidence or self-efficacy, it's a chicken and the egg issue of what comes first, success or confidence, right? Confidence obviously leads to success, but success also
Right.
leads to confidence. And so I think really in counseling with some people, it's just pick one. Which one would be easier for you to get your hands on first, right?
Yeah.
In just the smallest sense. If you can go out and have the smallest victory, do that and then recognize it, acknowledge it, appreciate it, and then move on to the next one, right?
Yeah.
Control that momentum between, okay, I believe in myself, I'm trusting myself, and okay, I'm seeing results, I'm making progress, I'm doing good things. And that's not a linear journey, of course, but that's where it
Yeah.
starts.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, again, like there's that, I don't know if you've read that study, and I've brought this up before in the podcast by Albert Bandura, the self efficacy theory, where people are not born with confidence and it's not something that's genetically inherited for any of us. It's something that we actually have to build. And
Mhm,
one of those is like you mentioned, and he calls it self mastery experiences. So going out and doing it, and then you get that confidence.
mhm,
But I think a lot of people misconstrue, you know, having to be overly confident, and you don't have to. Like
mhm,
you can do something small like you mentioned. Like even um science will show like a micro habit.
yeah,
So like AKA saying I'm going to do this thing and then do it. That's
mhm,
also how you can build trust, and it doesn't have to be huge. It could be I'm going to commit to drinking 40 ounces of water a day
mhm,
and then following through on that. And that registers to your brain like, oh, I follow through on my word.
mhm,
And that helps build self trust. And I think a lot of people think like we have to go out and accomplish these huge things and do all these big, you know, boisterous things to build self trust, but you don't have to. It can be small. And so there's my two
yeah,
cents that you didn't ask for.
that's good, yeah. And the important thing is to just keep going, right? Keep moving, keep trying.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
'Cause the only way you're not gonna make progress is if you just don't make progress, is if you
absolutely. So let me ask you this because I've asked almost every guest this question about what do you recommend to someone who's scared to do something? Like, what do you recommend? Like, what would you say if someone came to you and said, Tyler, I am scared about doing X, Y, and Z? How do you recommend people move through fear?
yeah. I have number 1, I'll go back to what I started with today. Anxiety is only gonna be felt before you actually do the thing. Um,
Yeah.
and if we can, put some steps in place to help you feel better about first doing the thing, let's do that. Let's get you in a state where you feel comfortable or as comfortable as you can to do it. Whether that's preparing you or, choosing a smaller goal at first if we need to and building up. There's certain things we can do to just activate the behavior because that's really what it comes down to. When we look at our brains, there's a, there's certain levels, right? And to keep this simple, there's a core level, a mid and a upper region, right?
Yeah.
And the fear response is housed in that core region. And
Mhm.
this is, all of our basic human functions belong in this region. We breathe, we eat, we sleep, we run around. Those are all basically, that's the core stuff. Everything a typical dog can do, we also have that in our brain, right? And
Yeah.
animals experience fear. So that's safe to assume that fear is housed in that lower region of the brain. Then as we move, toward the outer and upper regions of the brain, that's where we become human, right? That's where we can think, rationally. We can
Right.
plan for the future. We can do math, all those things, right? Um, the thing we have to understand with fear and anxiety and overcoming those things or learning just to live with those is we can't talk to that region of the brain that houses the fear response. It doesn't have language capabilities. Um,
Okay.
it's so it's it's so basic that, like I said, the language capabilities they're housed, elsewhere in the brain. So talking about reasons to not be afraid about public speaking or posting on TikTok, we can talk about that for hours and hours and hours, and it
Mhm.
won't effectively land with that fear region of our brain. That the only way that that learns is like a dog. It has to be trained. We can't sit there and talk to a dog saying, stay or behave when you're on a leash. It has to learn through repeated experience that,
Yeah.
okay, I learned a new skill, basically. I went through the experience of posting a talking video on social media, and it wasn't too bad, but before
Yeah.
that, there would have been no convincing me that I shouldn't be scared to post on social media. It was terrifying. But
Right.
through, repeated exposure is a therapeutic word. We have to be exposed to the perceived threat in order for that fear response or the fear region of our brain to be trained to understand that it doesn't need to be afraid.
Yeah, and it's all like survival based because that also so people know when you're living in a survival state, meaning you're in constant like parasympathetic arousal through your nervous system, fight, flight,
Mm,
fawn, or freeze, that fear region of your brain actually gets larger. And these smarter regions of your brain, what you were just talking about, like where logic lives, your
mm,
prefrontal cortex, and your hippocampus, where your memory is stored, shrink.
mhm,
And so that fear region starts to take over. And like you said, there's no language for it. It's very primitive and it's
mm,
what helps you survive day to day, but it also thrives off of the familiar,
mhm,
even if the familiar is not correct. And so, like you said, exposure is so critical because that's how it does train it. Like you do the thing, your body and brain learn, oh, we survived this, we're safe, I can do it again.
mhm. Yeah.
And it is just it's all about doing. Like
Mm,
even when you're scared. And I can only imagine, like I know whenever I launched the podcast, I was terrified to post that first thing. But then as soon as I did it, that fear response dropped because it was done.
mhm,
But pushing that button was terrifying, and I can only imagine it was the same for you.
mm. Right. Yeah. But then now you're at a point where you don't think twice about it, right?
No, it's normal. It's normal, and I mean, I'm assuming it's the same for you with the, like when people were like, "What?" I mean, I don't know. I assume people were probably like, "What are you doing? You're starting therapy in a golf simulator."
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
Like, I don't know what the initial reception was. I have seen the comments, and, I don't know if you know, but I'm based in Dallas. I've seen a lot of the comments where people are like, "You would crush it in Dallas," and they're not wrong.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. We're working on that. Um, I'm figuring out the some sort of expansion plan because I do see the interest in therapists and people everywhere across the country.
really,
Um,
really?
but yeah, there's been I haven't even posted about this, but there's a button now on my website that says request a location in your area,
Yeah.
and that's already being filled out by people. I've had
Wow.
dozens, over 60 people, just in the last couple of days fill that out. So there's definitely some interest there. It's just a matter of me figuring out the business side of things.
Yeah, that's amazing though. And I know, so just so people are aware, with a therapist, um, it's almost like and I'm going to relate it to what I know, which is the legal world, because my ex-husband was a lawyer. But with therapy, you are limited to um, the state or states that you're licensed in,
That's
correct?
right. Yeah.
And so with that, so if somebody, were to come to you and we're like, "Hey, I want to do a session with you." If they're not in Utah, would you be able to do a session with them even virtually or
Um, well, we'll get to the legal aspects of this a little bit, and I'm not trained in this, but um, you're correct. My therapist licenses are based in Utah. So I'm technically only able to practice therapy in the state. If the client is
Okay.
physically in Utah, that's the rule. There is some nuance there with coaching, that is much less regulated, um, and
Okay.
can serve the same or similar purpose. At least it's much less clinical, but it can still get to you know, the mental health, mental wellness side of things and just
Yeah.
improve your life and well-being.
Okay. Well, perfect. So if somebody wanted to do a coaching thing, they could definitely reach out.
And
Um,
then, yeah,
and I didn't know that. I just thought it was because I know whenever I looked at some therapists, they're like, "Sorry, we can't work with you." I'm like,
right.
"Okay, cool."
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, but coaching, if you offer coaching services, they can definitely work with you.
Yeah, and you have to be careful because it can get a little bit messy with the legal side. But if it's
Right.
separate, yeah, I mean, the tricky thing, the the more the bigger, limitation right now is the golf simulator, I guess,
Right.
is just here local, so I can't necessarily pick that up and move it to somebody or do
Right.
a virtual session. It really works a lot better if they're here local. So, that leads to me trying to work on expanding this model, and that's really all it is therapy in a golf simulator, expanding that to other locations, helping therapists to do that because it does take a lot of work. I mean, it's not as simple as just going and buying a simulator and telling people, "Hey, I'm doing therapy here." Really
Yeah.
get the word out, get people interested, get people understanding what's happening, what's being offered. Um, so I'm currently working on that from a business standpoint, working with some individuals to do some sort of expansion program.
Yeah. Did you oh, I just had a question and it might have slipped my brain, but about this that there oh, are you the first person to do this? Do you know? Therapy
Uh,
kind of outs we're gonna call it therapy outside of the box, where, yeah, it's in a golf simulator, but therapy outside of the office, really. Are you the first person to do this?
Um, I don't know of anyone else doing therapy in a golf simulator. There's plenty of other approaches and methods of doing
Yeah,
therapy. There's equestrian therapy, right? Where you work with horses and
right.
there's things like that. There are certain therapists that I know of that have, reached out to me or that I just have known through social media, um, where they go with a client and golf on a course. They like ride along
Oh,
in the
really?
they talk while they golf. So that's great. Same exact idea, right? You're doing the activity
Mhm.
that definitely lends itself to conversation alongside with it's golf is perfect for this. Um, and then just getting outside, doing an activity and bringing your therapist along basically.
Yeah. So why golf or a golf simulator for you? What was it about that you were like, "This is where I want a niche?"
Yeah. Um, First of all, I like golf. I'm not a great golfer by any means. I'm very average and not an average good golfer. I'm just an average golfer. Which is cool because I can play with anybody, right? And people come
Uh,
to Greencrest and they're very much beginners. Some people are much better than me, but we can hang in, it's fine. We're comfortable. Um, but there are other approaches, and I'd love people to kind of adopt this for other activities. There's pottery. You can do the same thing, right? It has to be an activity where
yeah,
you're together and you're not so focused on something that you can't have a conversation or, I would imagine there would be some issues with like rock climbing or something, especially in a
right.
public jam area. It's like that doesn't really lend itself to conversation. Great activity, great exercise, but the the therapeutic conversation side of that would probably fall a little bit short. Um, but I think this approach could definitely be expanded to other activities.
Yeah. And you I know that we spoke a lot about, like, the men shoulder to shoulder. Do you recommend that expansion mainly for men going through therapy? Like, if,
No, definitely not. Yeah,
okay.
I think there's opportunity here to better serve plenty of other populations. There have been comments on some of my videos talking about people with ADHD, how they do much better having an activity while they're talking. Um, and this is the case for a lot of women too. It's fine. It's
Mhm,
great if you're the one that's comfortable to just go in an office and sit down and talk on a couch. That works, and that is the best environment for some people, definitely, and some men that for sure, do that. But they're just it doesn't directly match with every personality, and so I think the idea
mhm.
is to just offer other options that maybe just get closer to the individual's personality and preferences.
And let me ask this, so if someone were starting therapy and they maybe would wanna do it more in comfortable environment that's more suited for them, like on the golf course, etcetera. Is it out of or is it would they be off base asking their therapist to do that versus having the session at their office? How would they even approach that?
Yeah. Um, I would say it's definitely not inappropriate to ask that of a therapist.
Okay.
And people, again, have commented that on some of my videos. They've said, I had a therapist in high school who would go on walks with me, right? And I think that's a
Yes.
very low entry way to do this, right? That doesn't require a lot. You have to keep in mind the confidentiality aspect. You just have to be upfront about that,
Right.
saying, look, I can't guarantee that this is going to be completely private. People are probably, going to see us. They may or may not hear what we're talking about. You just have to be upfront with that because that's the risk. And that's again why the golf simulator lends itself so well to this because it is completely private. You're in
Mhm.
your own room. But there are other therapists also that, especially working with kids, there's play therapy, and that's been studied and,
Right.
and proven very effective, for decades. Um, where it's a kid, they play on a sand table or just, play a game. It could be Uno, right?
Yeah.
It could be anything. Um, and you can do that as adults too. You can go in, ask your therapist in an email before that, hey, I'd really feel more comfortable if I brought my sketchbook in and I colored or I sketched while we were talking. I think that's
Yeah.
very appropriate to ask a therapist.
And what is the because I feel like that's being self advocate or being a self advocate, right? And advocating for yourself on what's best. And I think a lot of people may or may not have the tolerance level to do that. But if they could, I mean, and if the therapist said no, like, we're not going to do this, what would you recommend? Would you recommend reaching out to a different therapist or pushing back or what
Yeah.
would be your recommendation?
Yeah. Um, I would hope the therapist hears it out. And I would
Mhm.
imagine therapists generally are pretty good at that. And they teach that. So they're
Yeah.
pretty good at, trying to just, okay, help me understand, why that would help you. I think that would be a good question for a therapist to ask if they had some reservations.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, if a therapist did say no to a client, you definitely there's hundreds of therapists in your area. And
Yeah.
the most important aspect of therapy, and this is proven by research across the board, the most important aspect and the greatest predictor of um, efficacy in therapy is the client therapist relationship. Regardless of everything else, all the therapeutic modalities, all the environment stuff, it's just if you and your therapist feel comfortable with each other and that relationship is foundational.
Yeah, and so can we define that just a little bit deeper? I mean, obviously, like, do I feel comfortable opening up? And let's say they don't like the first session, but how would they know if somebody were new to therapy and starting? How would they know, like, okay, this therapist is for me, especially if they don't have that self trust that we spoke about?
Right. Yeah, that's definitely that's a common issue, good discussion to have because there is that level of maybe awkwardness to
Mhm.
ending a therapeutic relationship, saying, "This isn't for me. I'm gonna go with someone else," right? It
Yeah.
feels so, uncomfortable to do that. And, again, speaking from the therapist side, I would hope that the therapist, again, is understanding of that and encourages that, really, because they should know, really, if that relationship isn't there, if the client isn't feeling 100% or fully comfortable, they would be better served going with someone else. Um, and again, it's uncomfortable, it's awkward, it feels like a breakup, but I think with the client's best interest at heart, the best thing to do in that situation would be to encourage them to go find somebody else. Um,
Yeah.
and yeah, I can't say from experience, that that is always how it goes. I would say more often than not, the client doesn't have that conversation. They
Yeah.
continue seeing their same therapist, um, even if they have something in the back of their mind saying, there may be someone else out there that fits better. And that's not to say there's a balance here, right? Because we can't just bounce from therapist to therapist to therapist. There's going to be some give and take. There's a principle of good enough with everything in life.
Right.
The balance, right?
Yeah. Well, and I know, like, for me, um, I could tell usually after a session or 2. I always give it 2 sessions, and I
Hmm.
did have to cycle through a couple of therapists to find the one that I liked
Yeah,
and that I resonated with, and most importantly, I felt safe opening up to. And I think that's the key, is
yeah,
you need to find someone that you feel comfortable telling things to,
yeah,
because you will not get anywhere in therapy if you just keep stuff bottled in. Like, you're wasting your money and wasting your time.
yeah.
But it took me a couple, like, I always gave it 2 sessions. That first one, and for those listening, if you've never been to therapy, that first session is a little awkward.
Hmm.
Like, you're just like, or at least it was for me, where you're like, "I don't really know," like, where you're both, it's like a dating thing, like your first date where you're just like, "Hee and so it might be a little awkward. I usually give it to the second session before I make a decision point, like, is this person for me or not? But I think the key for those listening that have never been through therapy is this someone that I can tell things to without feeling on guard? Like, do I have to guard my deepest, darkest secrets?
Yeah, yeah. I think that's it. That's it exactly.
And as a therapist, can you just remind those listening what you're, like, the therapists have to abide by rule wise in terms of confidentiality?
Yeah, that's a good reminder. Because really, anything you say to your therapist will be kept between you and them, unless there's there's accurate information that someone's in danger of being harmed,
Mhm.
yourself included, um, or in the event of, you know, records being requested in a court case.
Right.
Really, period, like that. If those things
Yeah.
don't come up, that the stuff you say is gonna be kept between you and them. So really, I'm glad you brought that up because that's an important note to remember. You really can and hopefully are comfortable sharing whatever it is that's on your mind with the therapist, because it's like talking to a brick wall that actually cares and wants you
Yeah.
to have results, but other than that is not invested in that sense. Like you just met them 40 minutes ago, right? They don't have any opinion,
Yeah.
your mom or your father-in-law or anything like that, right? They're just there for you to talk through stuff, to process things, to feel better and learn some skills to just cope.
And as a therapist, can you tell me, like, after you end a session, like, are you really, like, mulling over whatever people tell you all the time? You're like, "Wow," like, I am going to assume you guys are not judging anyone, but can we just reassure people that, yes, you care about us as a patient, but I don't really care? Like
Yeah. I mean, this is a great conversation. I love that you're kind of getting a peek behind the curtain here a little bit. Um,
Yeah.
and I'm happy to give that to you because you're absolutely right. Like we do show up, and in those 55 minutes to an hour, we
Mhm.
do care, right? You're all that's on our mind, and we understand. We fully get all of the intricacies of the relationships you're navigating and the emotions you're experiencing. Um, but then you're right. Like the session closes, and we write up our note. I have AI write up my note for me, honestly, and I read over it. And
Yeah.
I really don't give that much more thought to it. Um, Other than that, really, there is, we talk about compartmentalizing your life as a
Yeah.
therapist. You don't want to bring work home with you for your own well being and for your own sake, but also for your clients. Like you don't need to be thinking about or mulling over everything they said or judging them at all. No, definitely not. So I would say,
Yeah.
speaking of my own experience as a therapist, but kind of assuming that of other people, that's not the case. Like we care about you as a client, as a person, but then outside
Mhm.
of that hour, we wish you the best, but really it's your life that you're living, and we're just a small part of it.
Yeah. And I think that's where most people just get like so hung up on therapy, in my personal opinion, where they're like, oh, this person's just going to continually like judge me. Like, no, they're not. Like,
Mm.
it's their job. And if they're really good at their job, they know what they're doing. But
Yeah.
I
And I
think
will
that's,
say,
I think, oh, go
with
ahead.
every, you know, whatever you say in your therapy session, it's safe to assume that that's probably not the worst thing your therapist has heard that day. I tell people that all the time because I think it's just like, it could be, and I don't want to like, minimize the stuff you're going through, but because it could mean a lot to you. But for the therapist, sometimes it's just run of the mill stuff. And
Yeah.
it's a big deal for you. Like we understand that, but really, like I'm not surprised. I'm not shocked by anything that people bring up in my office.
Yeah. And yeah. And there's like no room for judgment. But that's all right. Well, I know where we're about to be at time, but if people wanted to find you, and I will link you in the show notes, where can they find you and
Thank you.
learn more about your golf simulator?
Yeah. First of all, I guess I'm in Lehi, Utah. That's where I'm located.
Okay.
That's where the simulator is. So my website is greencrestclub.com. I'm on TikTok and Instagram with that same name, Greencrest or Greencrest Club. Um, yeah, follow me there, comment, share what you think. And I do try. I'm I'm falling behind, but I do try to respond to messages, emails, anything across all platforms. I do try to. I read them, I see them, and I appreciate the support or even just the comments, concerns brought up, and I will do my
Yeah.
best to respond personally. I don't have anyone else doing that for me, and I don't plan on it. I'll read those myself, and I'll try to get back to you.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Tyler. What you're doing is so incredible. And I cannot wait to see where this expands to, and I mean that. I think that this is pretty groundbreaking, and impactful, and I can't wait to see this implemented across the states. I'm
Thank
so excited for you.
thank you. It's exciting. I really appreciate it, and thanks for helping get the word out.
Yeah, of course. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.